I look at your record. You've spent an awful lot of time in the Middle East, but actually almost all of it's been in Israel. You've visited Israel.
It's not true.
Hang on, you've visited Israel more than 40 times. You've lived in Israel. Have you lived in Turkey? Have you lived amongst Muslims, let's say in Michigan in the United States, or amongst Muslims actually in your own country in the Netherlands, Muslims who are moderate, law-abiding, peaceable people living in a democracy and accepting the rules of a democracy? There are hundreds of millions of Muslims who you have apparently no knowledge of.
I do. I visited not only more than you think Arab and Islamic countries, like I stated before, not only my friends, indeed, though ask my friends, I'm not ashamed to say that, of Israel. So, and I spoke to many people, from the clergy to the intellectuals to even journalists I spoke to. And I acknowledge once again the fact that in our societies there are a majority of the Muslims that are in fact not terrorists. But I know that if the amount of them will grow and if their culture will become more dominant, that it will change, and that the concept of taqiyya that they are stating now, by not really saying and showing often who they are, will change if they become stronger. And I'm not the first one. Maybe, no, I want to emphasize one thing, because you said, how can you be so sure? I want to tell you one thing, because you are a British journalist. I remember reading a book called The River War by Winston Churchill. It was published in 1899, and Winston Churchill at that time said very clearly that Mohammedanism is a militant faith and we may lose our civilization in Europe. And unfortunately what I see today, that we have a total lack of political leadership. The leaders in Europe and in the European countries are not behaving like Churchill, they are behaving like Chamberlain, selling out with the enemy, which is Islam, selling out our culture, our identity. And I am a politician that stands up and says, enough is enough. Islam is not part of our culture, should never be, and will never be.
But here, well, I'm certainly not anti-Muslim, but indeed I believe that Islam is a threat to our civilization. I believe that our country is based on values that are based on Christianity and Judaism, and that Islam really is a threat to our freedom.
This all started with the Danish cartoon event, right?
It did.
Why is it that people get so offended over a cartoon? Why is this happening?
You know, because for more than 1 billion Muslims, 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, Muhammad is a kind of role model. He's an example. And that's why every time somebody depicts or mocks Muhammad, Muslims get angry. And my point exactly is, because this is part of the problem, you know. Muhammad is not a role model.
The Quran isn't part of the problem.
Yes,
if we look at the life of Muhammad, isn't it extremely controversial, and the age of his wife, and he's a controversial figure.
Certainly. And he's certainly not a role model to so many Muslims. Muhammad, as a matter of fact, was a terrorist, was a warmonger. He beheaded Jewish tribes, and he was one of the guys who participated. I believe that if Muhammad would be alive today, he will be tried and he would be found guilty of terrorism. He was not a guy, besides being a pedophile and indeed consuming Aisha when she was 9 years old, that should be the example for so many Muslims in the world.
Why do you think so few people are willing to say what you just said? And what has happened because you say these things?
Well, because if you talk the truth about Islam, if you talk the truth about the life of Muhammad, it's not a party. You will get sued, you will be taken to court, you will get death threats, people will call you a bigot or an extremist, which of course is just for stating the truth. Look,
wait,
what happened.
You've been sued over this?
I've been sued over this, yes. I've been taken to a criminal court, I've been taken to a default court in my own country just for speaking the truth.
In other words, do you have speech laws or hate speech laws?
Hate speech laws. You know, in the city where I live, The Hague, where the government and the parliament of the Holland is seated, in The Hague. Last year, there were fans of ISIS waving the black flags and also waving flags with swastikas, who shouted death to the Jews, and they were left alone by the mayor, left alone by the police. And if you say, hey, here we have a problem with Islam, not with the people, but with the ideology. It's an ideology of hate. Our own identity, our culture based on Christianity and Judaism is far better than the Islamic culture. Then you get into trouble. That is Europe today.
You keep reading about Europe and the Islamization of Europe and the rise of anti-Semitism. How bad is it?
It's very bad. It's very bad. With the growth of the Islamization, we saw an enormous growth of the anti-Semitism as well. And let me tell you, Sean,
You say it's happening simultaneously.
It's happening almost simultaneously.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.
Ik vind dat u daar een ernstige inbreuk op maakt door maar net te doen alsof de islam een verwerpelijke godsdienst is.
Kunnen moslims niet reageren? Ik wil hier even op reageren. Ik wil hier echt even op reageren. De heer Cohen zegt dat de islam eigenlijk niet anders is dan andere godsdiensten. En meneer Cohen, hoe kan het dan? Dat ik nu al bijna 6 jaar lang bij ieder publiek optreden, ook nu terwijl ik tegenover u sta, een debat moet voeren met een kogelvrij vest aan en u niet. En weet u waarom dat is, meneer Cohen? Omdat mensen die kritiek durven te hebben op de islam, die worden of vermoord of die krijgen honderden doodsbedreigingen per jaar. En de mensen die dat niet doen, de mensen die knuffelen met de islam, die kunnen van hun vrijheid genieten. En ik gun dat u. Maar denkt u daar eens over na. De islam is geen vredelievende en makkelijke religie. De islam is een totalitaire, gewelddadige, intolerante... Meneer Wilders, even voor de duidelijkheid. Zegt u eigenlijk, zegt u eigenlijk dat door het softe beleid van onder andere de Partij van de Arbeid, dat u nu een kogelvrij vest moet dragen?
Zeker niet. Maar wat ik wel zeg...
Dat suggereert u wel.
Wat ik wel zeg, is dat de heer Cohen, door net te doen alsof de islam hetzelfde is als het christendom of het jodendom, de plank volledig mislaat. Als ik of anderen in de samenleving kritiek zou hebben op het christendom of op het jodendom, dan waren wij niet met de dood bedreigd. Dan waren er geen moslims geweest die aanslagen pleegden of dat dreigen te doen. De islam, meneer Cohen, en eindelijk open uw ogen, is iets verwerpelijks.
Het laatste woord is...
Meneer Wilders.
Mevrouw de voorzitter, laat ik als antwoord op de heer Zijlstra het volgende zeggen. Er is een onderzoek geweest van een geleerde die heet Ruud Koopmans. Ik denk dat veel mensen hem hier wel kennen. Hij werkt als hoogleraar in Berlijn en heeft een onderzoek gedaan. En dat onderzoek is van 2013. En wat zegt dat onderzoek in 2013? Dat onderzoek zegt in 2013 dat 54,5% van de moslims in Nederland terug willen naar de roots, de basis van de islam. Dat 74% van de moslims in Nederland vinden dat er slechts 1 interpretatie van de Koran en de islam geldig is. 3/4. Mag ik een paar citaten uit de Koran voornoemen, mevrouw de voorzitter? Surah 8, vers 60. Maak voorbereiding tegen hen. Met wat gij wilt, kunt ge de kracht van paarden om te terroriseren. Surah 47, vers 4. Wanneer gij een ontmoeting hebt met ongelovigen, houd dan op de nekken. En wanneer gij onder hen een bloedbad hebt aangericht, bind hen dan in de boeien. Surah 8, vers 39. Voer oorlog tegen hen totdat er geen verzoeking meer is en de godsdienst geheel toebehoort aan Allah. Ik kan zo nog een uur doorgaan. 74,3% van de moslims in Nederland vindt, volgens professor Koopmans, dat er slechts 1 interpretatie, dit is hem, wordt toegestaan. Meneer Zijlstra, als wij meegaan met uw cultuurrelativisme, gaat Nederland kapot en ik pas daarvoor.
Dutch politician named Geert Wilders has produced a film that says flat out the Koran incites violence. Well, that hypothesis itself is inciting violence, as Mr. Wilders has been threatened and even denied entry to Great Britain. Here's a clip.
Islam is superior than the Jews, than the Christians, than the Buddhists, than the Hindus. The only deen Allah accepts is al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
You will take over USA. You will take over UK. You will take over Europe. You will defeat them all. You will get victory. You will take over Egypt. We trust in Allah.
Yeah, when you look at the philosophy...
If you look at the ideology of Islam, it's a totalitarian ideology.
But you don't spend much time in the documentary on the Quran itself. And again, you can take the Old Testament and the Bible and pull out all kinds of inflammatory stuff. And I'm saying to myself, what good is... Here's the bottom line on it, sir. What good is this? Most people know in the free world, not in the Muslim world, in the free world, most clear-thinking people know that worldwide terrorism is driven by Islamic fascism. Most people know that. What good is you telling them again?
Unfortunately, most people in Europe don't know, especially the political elite, the leadership in Europe. They don't know it. They are afraid. They are what the Arabs call dhimmis. They are afraid of the reality. If I tell you that even today in a European country, Great Britain, the country that banned me and sent me away after detaining me for a few hours, we have already today, when it comes to family law, Sharia courts functioning.
I mean, this is Europe today.
But you can't tell me after the London subways got bombed, after your compatriot got murdered in the street of Holland, after they blew up the train in Madrid, after all of these things happened, that Europeans don't know? No. They don't know?
The European
they're
people,
afraid. They're cowards.
They are big, fat cowards.
Okay.
I believe that Islam and freedom are incompatible. And I believe that the mistakes that we made in Europe in the last decades by allowing so much mass immigration from Islamic countries is a warning that if Australia is not vigilant enough to preserve their freedom, what has happened here might happen to Australia in the next decades as well.
So, very precisely, you plan to warn Australian audiences of what you see as the danger of Islamic migration, is that correct?
Well, yeah, I believe that, once again, Islam and freedom are incompatible. Islam is, according to me and my party, not so much a religion as well as it is a totalitarian ideology. In Islam, there is not much room for anything else but Islam. Look how in societies today where Islam is dominant and prominent, how any non-Islamic person, whether it's a Christian or an apostate or a woman or a critical journalist, how they are treated. This is in a very bad way, often with the death penalty or imprisonment or all those kind of terrible things. And I believe that with the mass immigration to our free societies, our societies will change, and it will change for the worst. And I'm proud to say, and you are not a racist or a bigot or anything like that, if you say that the Netherlands, as Australia, is a culture based on Christianity, on Judaism, on humanism, and is certainly not, nor should it ever will become, a society based on Islamic values. We should fight it, we should stop it, we should be proud on who we are and define what we are not.
I'm going to pick you up on some of those points in a little while, but what do you actually know about the Islamic community in Australia? What have you heard about what is happening here and Australian multiculturalism, which it seems to me could be quite different to multiculturalism in Holland?
Of course that's the case. I'm not saying that it's exactly the same. I know, and I also spoke in the United States of America and in Canada and other countries where they have good results with immigration, that it cannot be compared everything to Europe. But I know that where we today in Europe have an enormous influx of, in the last decades, of people from Islamic countries, that our society has changed, that it has worsened for that reason, that unfortunately non-Western immigrants, often Muslims, are overrepresented in statistics of crime, of dependency on social benefits, that we have honor killings, that we have genital mutilation, that we have streets where women with headscarves and burqas are not the exception anymore, and that it's getting worse. And what I'm trying to do when I visit your beautiful country, Australia, is warn Australians that even though it might not be the case today, learn from the mistakes that we made in Europe, be vigilant and look at Islam for what it really is. Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is a totalitarian ideology. The best example is that if any person, any Muslim wants to leave Islam, then the penalty is death. It is not even allowed to leave it. And that's why I believe Islam should not so be compared with other religions like Christianity or Judaism, but Islam should be compared to other totalitarian ideologies like communism or fascism.
Of course, but the Quran, according to me, is a fascist book. So my aim is to attack and to expose the real nature of the Quran.
Have you read some of the passages in the Old Testament?
Of course I did. And as you know, the Old Testament, and I know everybody knows passages from the book Deuteronomium, and you know that after the more harsh parts of the Old Testament, there was a New Testament, and the New Testament was more moderate, and Christianity went to a phase of enlightenment and accepted the separation of church and state. Unfortunately, there is no new Quran. I would be indeed very much in favor if Muslims would get rid of all the violent passages from the Quran, get rid of it, tear it out the Quran, and come with a new, more moderate Islam.
Well, should all of the violence in the Old Testament and the calls to kill people and slaughter them, Should that also be eliminated? Should Christians today, Jews, go back and purge their books?
No, like I said, the Old Testament, no,
just the
like
Muslims.
I said, the Old Testament was followed by a more moderate New Testament, whereas we have not seen, because Muslims believe it's the word of Allah and it cannot be criticized, there has not been, and there is not, and there probably will never be, a new Quran. And at the same time, we have in the world no problem with Christians or Jewish, exceptions of course are there. We have a problem all over the world with the ideology of hatred, which is called Islam.